Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and I want you to win all of your Warcry games. Now, Dan, you say, I don't want to win all my Warcry games. I want to have a list that feels like mine, that feels like something I created that nobody else has. I know a lot of folks feel this way, and I'm here to tell you that you don't have to compromise. Let me explain.
For more shows like this, check out the Goonhammer Media Network. More info at media.goonhammer.com.
So this is something that I thought about a little bit when I did my last sort of meta video. And those videos are very much a reporting style video. I'll link to the last one down below, but those videos tend to tell you what is doing really well without trying to necessarily teach you how to join that group. And that's what this video is really going to be all about. I wanted to talk about archetypes because this is something that is generally used in collectible strategy games. You know, Magic the Gathering, all of the cards games will have sort of established decks that people flock to where you have flex slots, but you also have just kind of a general core that's there for you. And I thought about this a lot while watching the 3 Heroes 1 Chaff list building video. I think it's a really cool sort of podcast style episode. And it was really interesting hearing their perspectives, but also feeling like I wanted to add maybe a more kind of structured rubric to the discussion. So some lists that do really well, that have a really high power level in this game, are just kind of a puzzle box with only one solution. And something I've noticed is a lot of Warcry players, you want to feel cool, you want to feel unique. I get it. We play GW's least popular big game for a reason. But so it's kind of natural that people aren't going to gravitate towards some of those one solution puzzle boxes. But there's also sort of core combos in this game that just can take up 2/3 of your list and be extremely powerful, give you the options to do some very, very powerful things, while then letting you just kind of stretch your legs and do whatever cool things you want outside of them. And finishing it off properly, like these will be little core combos that are going to lead to winning games, but don't get you all the way there. And how you finish it off is really important for, knowing which sorts of missions you expect to play and knowing kind of what sort of environment you expect to be in, or just what kind of play style you want to add to it, something like that. These are also really great examples of how to sort of use your pet models in their best possible way. That was something I used to do with Nurgle, was you could kind of ally in whatever goofball you wanted, and it would look like the best version of itself. So that can be pretty sweet. If you're going to do this, the first step is to kind of understand the missions you expect to face. So I'm just going to use as an example what I think are the 3 most important missions to be ready for in the Nova Open, which is coming up sort of at the end of this month, August of 2024. I'm hoping this video will still be useful beyond that, but this will just be kind of an example to use. If you're using, say, the Mission Shuffler cards, something like that, I can tune a few things to that too. Basically, the Mission Shuffler cards are just another tournament pack. There's not really much difference there. The difference is that in those cards, hunting power is really important, and so that's sort of just a slight difference from the average tournament pack. And I can talk about that with each archetype too. So what is an archetype, you ask? Here's the first example. And this is Slaves to Darkness. This is, I think, one of the most powerful factions in the game right now. You can have sort of the core of it, which is 5 models, a Varangard, Vexmore, 3 Marauders with Flails, and that comes out to 645 total points. So that's just under 2/3 of your list. But what this is giving you is you're going to have the Marauders to give you just like some bodies that are incredibly durable. The Marauder itself only has 10 wounds, but the second your opponent kind of fails to kill it in one shot, the next time they attack it, you get to heal 3 of the wounds that they've dealt you back, which means that I find that Bigger chaff, sort of more offensive chaff, just never manages to ever kill Marauders. So something like I really love Ardboys. Ardboys just never manage to chew through Marauders. They just like, you can put a Marauder in front of an Ardboy, and even though the Ardboy is 20 more points and much more sort of focused on combat, it never takes it down. It never wins. And then what Vexmore does is just an incredibly efficient piece that can just sort of hold a corner of the board really, really well and just put out way more damage than it should for its points, which then finances the Varen Guard to be able to run around taking out tiny little pieces. The Varen Guard never kills its points worth of models, but that's okay. That's not its job. Its job is to kill the models that are going to lead to you scoring points in the mission, whereas Vexmore's job is to just like be incredibly efficient and require more than its points worth of models to deal with it. And so the two of them kind of synergize so well in that way. But 645 points does not make a list. And this is kind of cool because you can really tune this to be whatever you want. You can get kind of crazy with it if you want. You can bring in Ephelim's Pandemonium. You can get Skabbik's Plague Pack. For example, the Nova Open format, it sort of hinges on the 3 missions I showed there, but there's 3 objective missions total. And even Loot and Pillage has quote-unquote objectives, even if they are full of treasures. You don't score points the same way. Skabbik's Plague Pack is a really sweet little underworld warband that has a kind of, it's a bit of a goofy ability, but it is a pretty good ability in objective missions to put out damage towards anyone who's contesting a given objective. And so that can be a really solid sort of fun choice. Ephelim's Pandemonium is really cool because they sort of let you sort of blink and teleport around the board. You get to kind of scratch your itch of having done really cool stuff, even though you're running maybe a more meta heavy warband. It also is going to be really good in the Nova Open Pack because of how well it exploits Pillager's loot. Teleports in general are incredibly powerful on Pillager's loot. Pillager's loot is a form of loot and pillage from the old Rumble Pack, where basically these 3 objectives, they all have treasures. You spend an action to loot the treasure, and then usually you're kind of stuck there because you don't get to just like run, grab it, and go. And so then your opponent has a really easy time tracking you down and fighting you. Well, Ephelim's Pandemonium, Sylvaneth does this too, but Ephelim's Pandemonium is able to kind of break that symmetry by using an action and then using an ability to just blink out of there, which is incredibly powerful in that mission. The other kind of way to do this is to just add 2 more Marauders. Marauders are amazing, so why not have more of them? And then you just get a nice extra fighty piece for 235 points. And you can do so many different things with that. You can do a Mighty Wrathmaster, which is the Wrathmaster from Khorne, who is the Wrathmonger leader, who has been given +1 strength. He's got 6 attacks, so +1 strength is incredibly valuable there because, you know, you're gonna be rolling whatever the dice was. If you were moving 3 or from hitting on 4s to hitting on 3s because you gave yourself +1 strength, you're gonna roll that 3 at some point with the Wrathmaster because he rolls so many dice. And so it's an incredible investment on the points that you're eventually gonna score, right? The Bloodkind from Beasts of Chaos is a really good option here. You can also grab a Slaughter Priest, which lets you grab a whole bunch of blessings, so you can like bless your Varen Guard with damage if you go get a Slaughter Priest, something like that. So for actually executing the plan, this is where there's more into going into a list than just sort of the models you take, right? You need to actually sort of attack your missions correctly, right? The important thing here is that Vexmore is going to want to be in your hammer because Vexmore doesn't want to run around much. Vexmore really wants to be sort of in the thick of things. So if we look at these missions, your hammer is going to be on the center of the board. This is the map for Lightning Raid. Lightning Raid is from a very complex mission pack that GW made called the Ferocious Gnarlwood 2 mission pack. And it starts you very, very far away from the objectives that you have to contest. And so the hammer is really the one way to have a slow fighter be very impactful in that mission, because it's the least you have to walk to get to an important part of the board, and there's usually a lot of action in this center line too. So that's really where Vexmore needs to be in that mission. If you put him in the dagger, he's going to really struggle. If you put him in the shield, where he comes on round 2 and then he can really only fight over this mission and the sort of corner objective and then maybe the side objective late in the game, he's really not going to be able to do what he does, which is just be incredibly points efficient and require more points worth of models to balance him out, right? If he's stuck in the corner and he's just all he's doing, he's not fighting, he's only just counting for one body on an objective, well, your opponent can balance him out with a 55-point model, and that's a disaster, right? So you really want him in that hammer. And the same is true for Pillager's Loot, where this is the incredibly fighty sort of position where no one can really grab this treasure and abscond with it super easily. So you'll have time, even if your opponent runs in and loots, Vexmore can just run in and then just be in the neighborhood, which is important to have. And then this fight is usually very crucial. You could also have Vexmore in the dagger as a carrier who can just go grab the treasure and just stay there, and you're not worried about your opponent being able to take it from him. But I don't think that that's high value, because your opponent can always, if they're fast, they can always just kind of decline to fight you. Whereas it's very rare that your opponent can afford to decline fighting the center in Pillager's Loot. And your shield is, of course, needed to hunt down the opponent's dagger in Pillager's Loot, and Vexmore is terrible at hunting. So that's not what you're going to want to do. So that's kind of why I would put Vexmore in your hammer. For the Varangard, I think there's very reasonable arguments for putting it in the dagger or the shield. The dagger, having it in round 1 in Lightning Raid is super important, and it's a model that can get to any objective, which is really nice from this corner. The shield, being able to hunt down your opponent's dagger in Pillager's Loot is incredibly powerful. Also, you can do kind of cheeky things if you've got a fast fighter in Rising Dread is what this one is. This is from my title pack, which I released a long time ago. I can link the old one here. I'm planning on releasing the 2.0 version, but Rising Dread will still be in that version. But you can do cheeky things like if you put a Varangard on your opponent's home objective, all of a sudden, like, it's right in their face. They're having a really tough time dealing with it. So you can do kind of funny things with that if you've got one in your shield. So I think you could argue for either one, but I think it's really important just not to have Vexmore anywhere other than your hammer for the Nova pack. If you're looking at cards, it doesn't really matter which deployment group is going to be what you're playing if you're using mission cards, but I would just make sure that Vexmore and the Varangard are in different deployments, and then that you've got at least one Marauder in each one, so that you can sort of have that extra activation, etc. If you're asking what I would play, I would probably mess around with either Skabek's Plague Pack, because I think they're so cool, or if I was trying to be a little serious but still kind of silly as well, I would play the Wrathmaster. I think the Wrathmaster is so cool. He is a little bit worse in this world of counter, but something that people have to realize a little bit is there's way fewer Horde warbands now that the really broken chaff models have been nerfed. And so being weak to counter is a little bit less of a curse than it used to be. And so I would be really tempted to just like take the Wrathmaster out for a spin. I think he's so cool. And I would definitely bless him with Might, because I think that's really important. Even though I just said that counter isn't as scary as it used to be, it still exists. And so that Might blessing is important to sort of reduce your sort of vulnerability to it. What I think you should play, unfortunately, is probably a Slaughter Priest plus Blessings. I still don't think Slaughter Priests are all that good, but they do work okay with Vexmore, sort of being able to manipulate your opponent's movement when when Vexmore is essentially straining their movement, right? Positioning is so important when you're playing against Vexmore that having a Slaughter Priest who can manipulate that is kind of nice. If you do take this route, though, and this is true of the Wrathmaster as well, if you decide to have like one more fighty piece and then more chaff, that's probably the more like straightforwardly powerful version of the core. And if you are doing that, Slaanesh Sybarites are just as good as this core, or maybe not. They're either just as good or really, really close. But if you're just going to have 3 threats, one of which is Vexmore, one of which is a Varangard, you may as well have those little 55-point Blissbrew homunculi because they'll sort of let you fit more points worth of threats. I don't think Blissbrews are as good as Marauders in general, but they are certainly an option to take. Let's get into the next one, which is Dispossessed. Dispossessed are another, I think, keystone of what the top metagame would look like. Now, Dispossessed are less popular than other warbands, I think probably just because of the sculpts being so old, but I think the sculpts look way better than those old Marauder sculpts for Slaves to Darkness. So depending on where you live, where you're playing, you might not see a lot of Dispossessed, but they are incredibly powerful. And the thing that makes them so powerful is super simple. It's just a Warden King. You can do another leader too, but I think the Warden King sort of fits their purposes, I think, better than the other leaders do. And then 5 Iron Breakers. This is just 6 fighters for 520 points, which gives you kind of 480 points to play with. What makes them so powerful is that they have these sort of 2 different flip sides to what they can do, where every dwarf can just spend a double to count for 3 on an objective. So in any objective mission, the dwarves are just incredibly durable and scary. Or they're not, well, they are kind of durable and scary because they're toughness 5, 12 wounds for only 75 points. But I mean, they are incredibly impactful on each kind of space that they occupy. And then if you do take one down, they get to react to give a free action to any sort of ally. The idea here, I think, was that like dwarves are incredibly like durable and stubborn, and taking them down has a cost to it. But in practice, it made it so that like really, as the dwarf pilot, you're just like praying that your dwarves die, which is kind of funny, and maybe not necessarily how you would expect dwarves to play. But what that does is it makes it so that any big ally that you include with the dwarves is sort of twice as impactful as it would be, because it can sort of get a whole bunch of actions if you sort of execute the plan properly as dwarves. Executing that plan, I think the play style is much more important than how you do deployments, etc. You really want to be waiting a lot with dwarves, and a sort of classic thing is to wait with a few of them that you're not going to do your objective grabbing double with, and then you wait and do the double on an objective to essentially claim an objective with 3 models for 1 on it. And then your opponent is still just in this situation where they can't necessarily put damage onto you without sort of triggering your crazy good reaction. And they still have to kind of figure out where they're going to stand based on how you're claiming objectives, things like that. And then before you do any second actions really with your dwarves, that's when you get to put a ton of pressure on by activating your big scary pieces. And that puts even more pressure on them to finally execute their plan in the round, which is a terrible situation for them, right? Because now they're taking more damage than they're putting forward, and they're scared to put forward damage until you've sort of committed full dwarves. And so your opponent will usually have like 4 or 5 activations of awful options where no decision is good for them. And that just kind of gives you the power of Dispossessed in those missions. You're just so dominant on those objective missions. Now, the thing that Dispossessed have to do which I think is doable in list building, is plan for those missions that aren't going to be objective missions. So if you're playing with shuffler cards, that's going to be the majority of missions. If you're going to Nova, I think the really important non-objective mission to win is Pillager's Loot. And so that's where you get to kind of flex, and you get a whole bunch of things that can be really powerful with Dispossessed. One is you could do like a Slan Starmaster and a Protector Prime. The Protector Prime is, of course, just like incredibly points efficient and really crazy when it's getting extra bonus actions because it's got the 3-inch range, so it takes up a huge piece of the board, which means you are often getting to attack with those bonus actions as opposed to necessarily having to move around. It also has a double to give itself a free move, so your Protector Prime can just be doing an incredible amount of stuff in any given moment, which is really powerful. Then the Slan Starmaster is just going to machine gun your opponent's cheap fighters, which is going to constrain their activations even worse than you are through your kind of weight economy. And that's really powerful. The Starmaster could also be there with like a Sonari Caligrave plus another Ironbreaker. The Caligrave is a model with kind of a goofy but kind of fun it's an ability where you can pick a spot and give your opponent -1 crit on that spot, which can make sort of chewing through your Ironbreakers even harder and really annoying, which is funny. You can also go with Hexbane's Hunters or Thundrix Profiteers for some shooting. I think that's pretty popular, mostly because dwarves have a reach problem. They can't kind of point at something across the board and take it down. That's why I included the Slan Starmaster here, but the Hexbane's Hunters have Quiet Pock, which does that, and Thundrix Profiteers have Iron Hail, who is a pretty decent shooter, and so that can kind of help you. You don't need to go with shooting, though. You can go with just kind of overwhelming combat power as well. So, for example, like a +1 attack Annie Prime, that's an Annihilator Prime, with a Quester. So any Quester Soulsworn will do. My favorite is the Errant Quester with Grand Hammer, but you can do the Quester Duelist. You can do the Quester Relictor. You know, any of them are fine as long as you don't do the Quester Leader, who is terrible. Then you have a 6th Ironbreaker, which is kind of nice to count to 9 fighters in this current age. You could also do like 2 Unblessed Annie Annihilator or Decimator Primes, which is really powerful. And so either setup just gives you an overwhelming amount of combat power to play with, which means that even if they do take down one of your crazy, scary Stormcast fighters, you still have another one that can just do incredibly powerful things out there. And then there's also Knave Blacktalon, who kind of fits in this space that's in between what an Annihilator would do and what a Slan Starmaster would do, which is a really nice place to be, where she can run around the board hunting things. If you need to give her a bonus action and there's nothing really juicy right near her, she can shoot as well with a shooting profile that's not great but not awful. And it's really nice in situations where if your opponent wins initiative and gets a net off, she can still kind of shoot the netter and often take out the netter so that this doesn't happen again next round, which is a really nice place to be. All of these are perfectly reasonable. What I would play is what I call Stormcast Bash Bros, which is the Annihilator Prime plus the Quester, because the Annihilator Prime just does an absurd amount of damage, is just an absurd like control piece in terms of just no one can come near him. I've recently took out a Storm Fiend in 1 round of attacks with him. He's really crazy. And then the Quester with Grand Hammer is just a really nice way to kind of move it around with your double. And then it also fights pretty well. And so then your Ironbreakers can give the Annihilator Prime bonuses, but then even if it goes down, your Quester is still a pretty reasonable option to use there. So I really like it. What you should play, I have no idea. There's a lot of good arguments for any of these, honestly. So just play whichever one you think is the coolest. Now let's get into Kruleboyz. Kruleboyz are kind of crazy because there's a little bit more to what's going on in this core because they have just more options. Destruction is kind of like that. So the two must plays with Kruleboyz are Herc de Howla and Shank. But then I think you need to pair them with one leader and one kind of reasonable smasher. So a leader is going to be either the Bolt Boy boss, the Killer boss with Flail. I've got two different points costs here because at 190 or 210, it's both solid. 210 is with the Might Blessing, the +1 Strength Blessing. Then you can do Manok de Cunnin, or you can do Dagok Finksteala. Your smasher can either be a brute boss, which can have +1 attack if you want, or a crusher, or a clawback, or a gut lord. I think any of them are reasonable. You just need something that deals a lot of damage and either brings some utility like the brute boss does, or brings some mobility like, say, the ogres and the clawback do, something like that. As long as it has just kind of an overwhelming amount of combat power, you should be good. And that's just kind of a core of 4 fighters that can cost you anywhere from 530 to 660 points, which gives you anywhere from 360 to 470 points remaining. How you finish this off is really up to you. One thing that you can try is just having a swarm of fighters. Gut Rippas and Pot Stab Grots are all reasonable ways to kind of fill this out, for example. So like 4 Gut Rippas are 300 points, which is a very reasonable way to sort of get to 8, and then you could add a Grot for getting to 9 fighters here. So if you're worried about objective missions, that's something that you could do. You could also bring in, Kruleboyz have a lot of pretty decent utility weirdos. So like Jags de Bleeda or Torka Tough Skull are some good little utility weirdos that you can bring in that will, half the time you bring them, they'll be like about as useful as a Gut Rippa was. And then the other half of the time you bring them, they'll like do their thing and it'll be really nice. And you'll tell all your friends that they were the reason you won the game. They weren't the reason you won the game, but they'll feel really cool and good. And so you can tell yourself that they were the reason you won the game, which is solid, right? And the utility weirdos are good for that reason. Boggle-Eye is a little bit different than those two because it's 70 points for a netter, and that's a perfectly fine place to be if you think that Shank is not enough. You can also just go for another smasher. This is very reasonable if you're playing with the cards, the Mission Shuffler cards from the core book, because just having a smasher is just really good in a lot of those missions. You want to kind of up your hunting power. So you can just take a second one from this list here on the bottom left, or you can take kind of a little smasher like a Troggoth or a Ardboy boss, which I think is really powerful, just to have a third threat, because your leader is going to be a pretty reasonable secondary threat, but then having a third one can be really nice. And then you'll still have points left over to spend on kind of going halfway. You could get a little smasher and a utility weirdo and a couple dudes, something like that, and that can put you in a really powerful situation. So Kruleboyz are much more open-ended than any of the other sort of cores I'm going to talk about in this video, but they're pretty sweet. And I think a lot of people like them for good reason. Though which one is the perfect solution really depends on the pack. Because there's sort of 2 objective missions and then that 1 treasure mission, I would probably, in the Nova open pack, I would probably lean towards wanting at least a couple more fighters here. So like at least 1 Gut Rippa and maybe a Pot or Stab Grot, just starting with like 120 points in that situation. And then I'd probably bring a little smasher like an Ardboy boss or a Troggoth. And I think Gut Lords are incredible, so I would want to try to fit a Gut Lord in there. But the issue is that because it's so objective heavy, going down to a Crusher or something gives you just a lot of extra points that might be really useful in all those objective missions, which could be nice. I also think having the third smasher is important because the one sort of non-objective is loot and pillage, where you want at least a little bit of combat power in 3 different fights. That mission basically just reads win 2 out of 3 fights a lot of the time, and so having sort of an extra threat is really important. So that's how I would finish off Kruleboyz. They are incredibly powerful in the current metagame, but they are not a sort of set list at all. You can really run them in any kind of way. I don't think Kruleboyz will ever be sort of quite as high win rate as some of these other cores will be, because it's easier to misbuild them. But that's okay, because any single pack that you can come up with, there is a perfect Kruleboyz list for that pack, which is a really powerful place to be. So the next archetype I want to talk about that I think is sitting here pretty at the top of the meta is Starmaster Gunline. And it all starts with a Slaane's Starmaster. This profile is pretty silly. Basically, you take it, it's normally 265 points for a little frog, your friendly neighborhood frog, who then gets a 20-point strength blessing to be strength 5, shooting 3 times, 3/6. And that's an incredibly good way to machine gun down the cheap fighters in your opponent's warband. And if you pair it with more shooting, you can really just overwhelm your opponent's ability to just say weather the storm on objectives or charge you down, etc. So that can be incredibly powerful. Also, when you're pairing it with more shooting, you aren't tying up the opponent. One of the big ways, for example, Hrothgorn Man-Trapper is an incredibly powerful artillery piece, much like the Slaane's Starmaster. And one of the ways that you beat a Hrothgorn list is you force them into combat with you, because they generally have to anyway because they're destruction, so it's mostly combat chaff, so that they have to go get onto the objectives and fight. And so you kind of stay out of Hrothgorn's way, and then you jump forward and get into combat with all of the cheap fighters in the warband. And you can, in order, you can kind of force your opponent to not be able to do that if the rest of your warband is also shooting. This core is incredibly powerful, especially if you play the cards, just like the mission shuffler cards, because a lot of those say, like, go like blood marked, kill their leader. Well, you can just reach out and start shooting their leader from round 1, and before they've even done a single attack action, you'll have done 5 or 6 attack actions with all of your shooting stuff, and so it's just really easy to take their leader out, stuff like that. You can kind of run this with 2 different factions in order, which is pretty wild. You could kind of do it with 3, actually, if you did Order of Aesir as your warband, but the Starmaster can go with either Wildercorpse or Hunters of Huanchi. With Wildercorpse, you take your dog boss. You can do the weapon, whatever version of the dog boss you want to run, and then 3 dual crossbows, spelled incorrectly here for fun. 390 points for the Hunters of Huanchi version, where you take a skink boss and then 4 Huanchi's claws. Those are going to give you slightly different utility than the 3 dual crossbows. They're a little bit faster. They don't do quite as much damage, but they are cheaper. The big sauce to both of them is that they have a free reaction. Well, it's a reaction. It's not free, but a reaction that gives them a bonus disengage. So if someone goes and attacks them and doesn't take them out in one hit, they can disengage and get out of dodge, which means that your Starmaster can keep shooting and they can keep shooting, which is just incredibly powerful. Like, all their friends can keep shooting, so you can always just focus fire whatever one target from the opponent you really want dead. There's nothing they can do to hide, basically. It's very scary. To be honest, of the archetypes that I've talked about, this one scares me the most. I don't think it's any stronger than, say, Dispossessed, Kruleboyz, or Slaves to Darkness, but it does scare me more than those ones do, because it's just so different as a version of Warcry. You don't get that many style points to play with here, but you do get some. And for 330 or 325 points, you can do a few different things. One is you can bring in a big 2-inch reach babysitter. The list in order is pretty long of reasonable inclusions here. You could do a Decimator Prime, you could do a Protector Prime, an Annihilator Prime, a Kurnoth Huntmaster, an Errant Quester with Spear, a Sora's Guard Alpha, or even a Vulcan Runefather. That one's really nice because it's a little bit cheaper, and that means you get to fit other stuff in your warband. But either way, what you want is just kind of a nice little holding piece that can take a hit, that can get into combat, but can also go fight something at 2-inch reach so that you can still shoot into that combat. So anytime you're playing offense with it, it doesn't non-bow with your shooters. And then ideally, all of these are somewhat durable for their points, because Warcry is a combat game, even when you're playing a gunline. So you do need to make some concessions to like going and standing on a point and sort of being the tip of the spear. And that's what these kind of 2-inch reach babysitters are. I think that they're pretty powerful. You can also just add more shooting. You could bring in Haskell's Hexbanes or Hexbane's Hunters, whatever it is. Haskell Hexbane plus Quiet Pock if you wanted. You could bring in Thundrix Profiteers. You could play a Castigator Prime. You can also just have lots of meat shields. So you could just fill it out with dogs and skinks. So that, your meat shields, you would kind of position them, you would deploy them in front of your shooters, and you would just kind of make it so that it's hard to charge you down, because anyone who charges you down runs into a wall of dogs or a wall of skinks, and then those skinks can just like bonus disengage out of there so that you can keep shooting, stuff like that. So any of those approaches I think could work. What I'd play is a big 2-inch reach babysitter. I'd go with a Decimator Prime or a Protector Prime, and then that would give me enough points for like another friend, right? And I think that would be pretty powerful. What you should play, I think you should play that. Maybe instead of a Stormcast big guy, you should have something cheaper, and then you get more dogs or skinks. But I do think that you should have a 2-inch reach babysitter. But if you want to, you can go for just more shooting, and it'll be pretty memorable. The important thing here is just how to execute the plan. It's really easy to accidentally trip yourself up when you're playing a gunline, where if all you do is stand and shoot, you can sometimes have a bit of a bad time, because you'll like really decimate your opponent's warband, but they'll still beat you on points because you're not going and scoring points. So make sure that you don't forget the mission objectives. Paint the edges, the defensive edges of the objectives, right? Don't position forward, position at the very back edge of where you're allowed to be on the objective so that you can keep shooting, stuff like that. When I play a Starmaster, I feel like ideally you want to shoot for, during a game, let's say you get 8 activations. Really, you get more than that with a Starmaster. They have incredible abilities. They can either do bonus disengages, they can get a bonus attack action, or move if they kill a model. So that's really powerful if you just shoot twice, kill something, and then for a double, you get to move. But I think generally, let's say you activate... Normally, you would activate 8 times during a game. Let's say you activate 10 because you're giving yourself 2 bonus movements, right? I would say if you're activating 10 times, I think you really want 3 of those to be moves at give certain points during the game with the Starmaster. It's okay if you're not just getting pure shooting all the time, because you want to be scoring points with it. This is an awesome list. I hope I don't ever have to play you with it. But I don't think it's very fun to play against, but it is very powerful right now, and something that people should know about, and something that people can very much put their own stamp on in a really cool way. Next is MonstaKillaz. MonstaKillaz have just been kind of hanging out with really high win rates for a long time. A big part of that is that when people stumble into tournaments with 1-box MonstaKillaz, it's a lot more forgiving than a lot of warbands. I think that the sort of important pieces are to have a harpoon and a monkey, and then the egg grots give you they give you like a lot of like reaction utility, and also just getting numbers in there is important. So I would say a beast knob, a howler, a harpoon, and an egg grot is kind of the core here. I wouldn't leave home without this group. And then yes, the bone saw is playable and reasonable, but it's not anything I would get excited about. The same is true of the Bala Boy. I think I'd feel happy cutting those, but it's fine if you don't, because they're not the worst. There's a lot you can flex with here, though. One, you can just do the 2 of everything list. I've played that list a few times where, when I know my opponent, it knows what they're doing, but they haven't brought necessarily the most cutthroat thing. That's usually what I'll play. Well, not usually. I have a lot of different warbands, but I have played this a few times in that situation. A few other things you can do, though. You can bring in a +1 attack Gut Lord and still fit an Egg Grot and a Harpoon in there. It's only 7 models, but you just get the biggest boy. And I think that Gut Lords are insane, and so any excuse that you can use to run them is reasonable. Also, if you want a little bit more kind of utility, you can get the +1/8 Brute Boss and then a Harpoon and a Monkey in there. So you're still on 7 fighters, but all of them except for the 1 Egg Grot are extremely high impact, which is really solid. You could also do like a Crusher and a Harpoon and a Boggle Eye and an Egg Grot, which is kind of cool because then you get the Netter in there. Boggle Eyes are pretty solid, and then having Harpoons is really nice, and then the Crusher can do a lot of what a big stompy fighter can do. If you want, though, you can get kind of weird with it. You can do Underworld stuff. You could have Hrothgorn and Quiv and Bushwhacka and Luggett and Thwack. I'm pretty sure all of those fit into 500 points. You could have Manok and Shank and 2 monkeys, which is pretty fun. Shank is really powerful at 55 points for a netter that hits on a 2-up instead of a 3-up, like most nets do. So that's a very reasonable thing. The important thing here is how you execute this plan. Sequencing is super important. One of the things to think about is, do you want your Egg Grot activating last, or do you want it activating first? Because one thing that an Egg Grot can do is just kind of run out there and tempt the opponent to kill it, because it's like, if you don't kill it now, it's going to threaten to react in this little area. And then once they do kill it, they are into your Harpoon range, and you can just start shooting them with the Harpoon, which is pretty powerful. Otherwise, you can just wait with an Egg Grot and just have it be the last thing you activate, so that it can kind of threaten to react anyone who tries to like run down your Harpoons to kill them, so that you save them with the Egg Grot. Hopefully they aren't fast enough to just sit outside the Egg Grot's reaction range and then hit your Harpoon. One big mistake you can make with positioning with this warband is putting your Harpoons in front of your Egg Grots, so that your opponent has a really easy time getting to your Harpoons. And it's really tempting to make that mistake, because you want to keep your Egg Grots alive, because Egg Grots are so easy to kill in one attack, and they kind of cost a lot. To be honest, there's a lot that can go wrong with an Egg Grot. So they kind of cost a lot for only having 6 wounds. So it's really easy for the opponent to kill them in one hit. And if the opponent is going around killing your Egg Grots in one hit, that's perfectly fine value, because 60 points is kind of a lot for that. So you do want to just be very careful with your positioning and looking at what your opponent has across from you, and knowing if you want to have your Egg Grot behind or in front of your Harpoons to protect. Basically, is your Harpoon protecting the Egg Grot, or is your Egg Grot protecting the Harpoon, is an important thing to think about at the beginning of every game. Otherwise, you want to be applying the correct pieces to the correct challenges. Gnarlwood Howlers are incredibly good at running around the board scoring points, for example, but they aren't good at sort of fighting a big scary piece. They're incredibly good at fighting little pieces, and so are the Harpoons, right? The Harpoons are just very strong into low toughness things. Blessing them with strength is perfectly reasonable to make them better into toughness 4, stuff like that. The thing that you want fighting big pieces is either your Egg Grots with their reactions, or just having them be nets. Or your Beast Knob can be really solid here, where if you can win initiative and their big thing is on a Howler or a Harpoon, and you use the Beast Knob double to reduce their damage, that can be incredibly powerful. The Beast Knob also can have strength 6 and just get really good damage onto big pieces that way. So you just need to make sure that each of the pieces in your warband is fighting the correct piece in your opponent's warband. If you're going to execute it at the Nova Open, monkeys in Pillager's loot are really interesting, because they can't carry treasure. So you really want them to be in the shield, I think, where they can hunt down the opponent's treasure keepers. But one funny thing you can do in the dagger is, if you have your dagger that spawns on the treasure, and then the opponent's shield spawns like a little ways away and needs to hunt you down. But you can have a monkey just run over, get an attack in, and then just sit there with its 18 wounds. And that can be kind of a funny way to stop your opponent from tracking you down. What I would play with MonstaKillaz, I love playing with monkeys. I think monkeys are the coolest. I would play Manok and Shank and double monkey, which gets you to triple monkey, because then you have Beast Knob, 3 monkeys, 1 harpoon, an egg grot, Manok, and Shank. The issue there, of course, is that what you should play is not that, because I don't think if you're trying to win, you should really leave home without a second harpoon. I think the harpoons are insane. You should always have 2 of them. And so if you are going under that constraint, if you're trying to be reasonable, then I think the Crusher plus Boggle-Eye list scares me the most, because the Crusher can crush things, of course, and then the Boggle-Eye giving you a netter with 12 wounds for just 70 points is just a little piece of kind of holding power. Gobapalooza in general don't get enough credit for how hard they are to kill, and so I think that's a really powerful setup. And then Crushers can kind of do stuff that a Beast Knob isn't quite enough for on its own, which is really nice, in terms of what they can fight on even terms, how many hits they can take, stuff like that. Crushers are very good. So that's what I think you should play, even though I would play triple monkey. All right, so I went over a bunch of archetypes that go through this idea that I'm trying to communicate, that there are incredibly powerful cores in the game that are sort of top tier, but you can top them off with kind of whatever you want. But I wanted to talk about some other kind of interesting stuff that's also potentially at the top of the metagame. One is a couple unproven sort of new archetypes. And that's sort of going with purity versions of the 2 warbands who I think won the most out of the new battle traits that came to Warcry. So the first one is Skaven. You can run the Stormfiend version or the Rat Ogre version. If you've got the Stormfiend version, I think you should have 2 Stormfiends, 2 Clan Rats, and then you have 320 points left over for like a leader and stuff, right? So for 320, you can get a like a Gray Seer for 140, and then you can still fit 2 Storm Vermin in. So that's, I think, a pretty powerful setup, but you can find other fun things to do with that 320 points as well. You could do Skabic and company. You could do a whole bunch of things. The Rat Ogre version has 2 Rat Ogres, and then you play with Pack Masters instead of Clan Rats, and that just opens up a lot more points for other stuff. Your leader, and maybe you just get a 3rd Storm Vermin in there, something like that. There's a lot of different options for what you can choose to do, but either way, I think it's incredibly powerful. Now, which one you want to be playing between Storm Vermin and Rat Ogres, Storm Fiends and Rat Ogres, I don't think matters too much, honestly. What matters is just kind of figuring out which leader you're going to run and whether or not you want to just go with Storm Vermin or whether you want to try to do something weird. Purity Ironjaws, to be honest, as long as you're basing your warband off of, the leaders that are decent and then Gore Choppa Brutes and Ardboys, you're going to be in a good situation. But I would really want to base my warband around a Gore Choppa Brute and 4 Ardboys no matter what. That gives you 505 points for other stuff. You can fit a lot into that other stuff, even if you want to be crazy and just put 2 mega bosses in there, that's okay. But there's a lot you can do there, and so what you decide to try to do is really up to you. I think there's a ton of options. I made an entire video on Ironjaws because I think Ironjaws are sweet, and they have just a ton of things they can do. Being able to, I should actually tell you what the battle traits are. The Ironjaws battle trait says that anytime your opponent waits, you get to get a bonus move action for 3 inches. So that's really powerful on things like the Gore Choppa Brute, things like the Mega Boss, things like the Brute Boss. All of those are really happy to get those bonus moves if they can get them. The Skaven battle trait says that you get to resurrect 2, or potentially 2 chaff models over the course of the game, one at the end of round 2 and one at the end of round 3. But they have to only be 70 points or less, which basically only means clan rats, pack masters, and giant rats. I think clan rats and pack masters are both perfectly good enough, and your opponent's really going to not want to kill them. But because they've got 6-inch move, they can just scream across the board and tie up your opponent's biggest things. And then what are they going to waste a disengage to try to run away from your clan rats? That's crazy, right? So you can make it really difficult for your opponent to function without killing your clan rats. And normally you wouldn't want to necessarily do this because 70 points is a lot to lose that quickly, and they're not very durable. But if you know you get it back, that's incredibly exploitable. So these are some potential new archetypes that you can play with that might be as good as the other things I've shown, or they might not be. I'm not sure. We'll see as things progress. But I do want to talk about, like I said before, some lists are a puzzle box with no other solutions, only one solution, and some are archetypes. I wanted to talk about archetypes in this video because I think that's what fits the way that most people like to play, of trying to put their stamp on things. But I do want to just shout out a few different lists that I think are absolutely top tier. You could win any tournament with them if you practice, and you just can't change anything in the list. Royal Beast Flayers, having a Royal Beast Master, 2 Barons, a Wielder of the Blade, and 7 Ghouls. This is a list I think you should practice with a lot before you play it. You want to be essentially being very careful, and then leveraging those Barons to get a whole bunch of extra movement actions after you've waited, things like that. You can get a lot of value from this list, but you need to practice it quite a bit. And then Slaanesh Chimera, you have a Vexmore with +1 attack, a Chimera, and then 4 Demonettes. Someone took this to a Warhammer World tournament and took 3rd with 3 wins and a draw. I think if you were to just shuffle up that tournament and run it 100 times, I really think this list would have won it at least 40 of those 100 times. I think Slaaneshi Chimera is really good right now because Vexmore is such a great holding piece. The Chimera is obviously just like the hungriest monster in the world. The issue here, this is another one you need to practice with a lot, because you need to know exactly what to do with your Demonettes at all times. This isn't like Nurgle Chimera from days past. You don't have just like a bunch of fighters to run around with. Instead, you just have an incredibly efficient fighty piece. So instead of kind of holding and supporting the Chimera, you're actually needing to play incredibly proactive with both your Vexmore and your Chimera, which is fine. It's incredibly powerful, and you have a lot of ability to do so, but you're just going to need to, if you've played Chimeras before, you're going to need to kind of change a little bit of how you play them to make this work. So that's kind of a overview of the kind of specific things that I think are right at the top here, and how you can kind of tune them for your own purposes. Something I kind of noticed with my meta videos was I was doing a lot of reporting and not a lot of kind of giving my own advice on how I think you should try to win. And I want to see, if people who want to win tournaments, I want to see them having the tools to do that, right? I want people to feel like, the metagame has been demystified for them a little bit. I think that there's a lot of play styles to really like in this sort of group of archetypes that I think are at the top of the metagame here. And so I hope people try them out, and I hope people have a ton of fun. So until then, and certainly anytime you play one of these archetypes, may all your rolls be crits.